Alrighty, let's get going. So I am here to talk about lifting the lid on where Teams holds your data. I got told by the gentleman who was doing the badge scanning that lifting the lid immediately made him think of lifting a toilet seat. So I don't know if there's some sort of a cultural misstep that I have made here, but to me this is like, going under the covers or having a look inside. This is not a toilet talk about Teams. Thank you to all of the sponsors. You've seen this all before. Too late if you haven't visited them in the vendor hall, because vendor hall's now shut. My name is Ben. I work as a head nerd for a company called Enable. They are not in the Teams and modern workplace space, but I have spent a lot of my career as a consultant working in that area. I contribute a chapter around Teams telephony to the Office 365 for IT Pros book, which is updated yearly and then monthly with everything as the platform changes. I've started a NASON podcast with Zach at the front here called 365 Explained. The idea is that we pick a particular topic out of the M365 stack and then explore it, lift the lid on it, if you will. But we've only done one episode, and we're trying to decide how we go from there because it's hard to get these things. So you can find me on the internet, on Blue Sky, and on LinkedIn down at the bottom there. So what are we actually going to talk about? Well, I've got a promise for you. You've slogged all the way up here to this room, and this is going to be the shortest session that you have ever seen at Commsverse. Because what we're going to look at, Commsv Next. Wrong conference, man. At Commsv Next. We're going to talk about where Teams and its friends keeps its data. So there is a really, really simple answer to this. Teams data is stored inside Exchange and SharePoint, and it's always been SharePoint. Any questions? No? All right, thank you very much. No, so seriously. This is because there is a lot of different places that, or when you dig into the weeds of Teams and friends, and by friends I mean I'm going to talk about Loop, sorry Zach, I'm going to talk a little bit about Copilot and some of those things that hook into it. The information that I've got on these slides, we take a little bit of a kind of funny route around just as stuff kind of pops through. So we're going to look at the different workloads in Teams specifically. We're going to look at Loop. We'll talk a little bit about that if you don't have the context around it. We're going to look a little bit about where in the world that data can be stored and where Microsoft has two solutions where you need to pin down the location in the world more specifically, which data centers your information is going to be held in. And we're going to touch a little bit on audit logs and purview, which is kind of relevant to sort of the data security, understanding where stuff is. But we're not going super deep into those things. But it's just to give kind of an overview and an idea. So we're going to start with Teams. And I've done this hopefully as not quite a quiz thing, but I've kind of broken down a table of the different kind of workloads. Unfortunately, on my screen, this looks a much nicer color than it does on the projector. But the idea is we're going to go through this and these are going to fade away and you'll be left with a wonderful table. So we have across the top different locations that we can store this stuff in. And then as much as I was joking about data being kept inside SharePoint and Exchange, that is broadly speaking the two locations that Microsoft is choosing to store stuff, right? Because that's kind of nice and convenient. There's even a thing called SharePoint Embedded, which we'll talk about when we get to Loop, which is like, I was having a discussion with someone last week, I think it was. We were talking about, is SharePoint really an appropriate file storage mechanism? Like, it doesn't seem like the kind of right place that you want to keep some stuff. The way Microsoft is using SharePoint Embedded and what it's done with Loop and what have you, like that's not going away. That is kind of their mechanism for doing stuff. Yes, there's Azure Blob storage and other kind of storage at scale type solutions that you might need in your environment. But SharePoint is kind of here for these particular kinds of use cases. So we have the user mailbox, we have a group mailbox. The reason we have a group mailbox is, as I'm sure you're aware, when you create a team, that creates an M365 security group underneath, which creates an associated mailbox and it creates a SharePoint site. So that is those two elements here. So we have the group mailbox and the group SharePoint site. Sorry, this is going to be terrible because I'm going to be all over the place and touching this, which will make the projector go off. We have some stuff that lives in, I've called it a bucket Azure service, because again, if you read the Microsoft documentation, there are references to kind of microservices or other components. That's what I've got as the Azure services. We have OneDrive for Business. That is effectively still kind of SharePoint storage underneath, but that is the one that is unique to me, right? That's the one that's permissioned to my user account. And then we have other, where there might be some other places that kind of data is stored. So One-on-one chats. Anyone want to have a guess where one-on-one chats are stored when you're having them in Teams? And when I mean one-on-one, that is, I should have done one to N really. That is conversations that are happening outside of a Teams channel, right? The stuff that is a chat. Anyone have a guess? User mailbox? Any advances on user mailbox? So the interesting thing when I was digging into this is my de facto answer was going to be exactly that. It's in the user mailbox because Microsoft loves squirreling stuff away inside the user mailbox, again, for reasons we'll touch on. What it's actually doing is the data is stored in a particular Azure chat service, then it is being written out into the user's mailbox. So when we're having a one-on-one chat, me and Zach, there's a copy being written into my mailbox, there's a copy being written into his mailbox, and they're going into hidden folders inside those mailboxes. And Microsoft does this quite a lot. You can't see them, you can't find them. The reason it does them is that all the kind of purview eDiscovery stuff that we're going to talk about that gives you controls and the ability to search and access through your data, when that chat is in the mailbox, you automatically get that as part of the standard service that you would have as part of Exchange, right? To be able to search through the normal email messages. So it's actually going into those two locations. This is live and this is kind of a delay write almost into the user's mailbox. Channel messages. Where do we think channel messages? They are the same, but a channel is underneath a team, and the team has the M365 security group. The M365 security group has this mailbox, so it's being written into the group's mailbox. So you can still, again, do the audit, do all that good stuff against the group mailbox. Meeting chat. Meeting chat goes into the user's mailbox. So again, when you have a user who is participating in a meeting, little asterisk, talk about that in a second, it goes into all of those different users' mailboxes, so they all have discovery of the content that was discussed in that meeting if you need to after the fact. And while it is live, it is against that Azure service as well. The little asterisk is because you can have different kinds of meetings inside Teams, right? And I'm not talking about town halls, webinars, all those kinds of things. You can have a channel meeting. Does anybody use channel meetings? Yeah. So for those that don't, a channel meeting is instead of me in Teams saying meet now or scheduling, in Outlook or inside Teams to generate a meeting that kind of belongs to me, I'm the organizer, I'm the owner. A channel meeting is where you go into Teams and you schedule from the top when you're viewing a channel, and it puts a meeting into the channel as like a chat blob. You know how you have the threads of messages. A channel meeting goes in there, and the nice thing about it, again, there's a catch, but the nice thing about it is then any chat that happens in that meeting, any recording, any recap, any files that are shared into the meeting are contained in that thread. So anybody who missed the meeting can go back into the channel, they can see that it's there, and they can interact with it. The little catch is that by default, when you generate a channel meeting, it doesn't invite everybody who's in the channel, right? There's a little toggle box when you do it to say individually invite participants to this meeting, and it will expand the membership of that channel and it will invite those people to the meeting. Okay, so just bear that in mind when you do it, because that's caught me out a couple of times. And you can do those as kind of recurring meetings as well if you want to, etc. It's a nice way, I've done some internal Copilot training, those kinds of things. I've always done them as we have a team for the training. We have a channel to do with the use cases and whatever you do it as channel meetings, because everybody can then find it afterwards. It doesn't kind of get lost, and we save all the good stuff. Okay, CDRs relating to the meeting, so call detail records, information about who joined, all that kind of stuff. That is stored, again, in the user mailbox, and it will go against the group mailbox depending on what kind of meeting it was. Meeting files. Any guesses for files? Kind of getting into the SharePoint territory here. If it was a channel meeting, it goes against the group SharePoint site. If it is a user meeting, one I created, it goes into the OneDrive when it was added into the meeting. Chat images. Anyone want to hazard a guess about images? By images, we've got two kinds, right? We have Giphies. If you have Giphies enabled, you can do the little emoji, whatever stuff, and pull a Giphy in. But we also have, if I copy and paste an image into it. Any ideas where they might come from? OneDrive? Interestingly, They go against an Azure media service. So if you go look through your OneDrive, you won't find a folder of stuff I have randomly shared in. And Giphy is actually an external pointer. So that is just a link back out to the Giphy site. I don't know anybody who's ever been burned by Giphy changing an image or something like that after the fact, but I imagine that in theory might be possible. But I'm assuming Giphy have protections in place there. Meeting recordings last on this one. What do you reckon for meeting recordings? SharePoint OneDrive? But whose OneDrive? Whose OneDrive is it going to go in? Person who recorded it? Stream? So it used to be Stream, and now it is Stream on SharePoint. So weirdly, it confused me, because I was like, they got rid of Stream, they dumped it all into OneDrive, and you go click on it, and it's still branded up as Stream. It's because it's the Stream service sourcing data out of OneDrive. So the answer is, and again, this is one of those, when I was doing this presentation, I was like, there's two policies I didn't know about here, which we will talk about. Incidentally, I should say the way I've structured my slides is you can get a copy of these afterwards. Some of them are fairly dense with data, and there are links to my sources in there. So, when you get the decks afterwards, you can go and dig around and find kind of the source material to uncover this stuff. So absolutely right. Normally, it goes into the user's OneDrive of who initiated the recording. And I don't kind of go into detail as part of this presentation, but there is a whole bunch of stuff in the tech docs that describes what happens around sharing that file, the recording, to make sure that everybody who is a participant has it linked in, but then you get issues with external users and guests and all that kind of fun stuff. There's some quite interesting detail in there. Now, bonus slide, the first one we've got is talking about meeting info. The transcript is held alongside the recording. So in the same way that in the Exchange mailbox, we have this hidden mailbox folder for other chat and the Teams messages, the transcript and other meeting info. The other meeting info I've got here is, I understand, we'll find out, but as I understand it now, do you know that Copilot is going to get the ability to reason over shared content in a meeting, right? So when Copilot first came out for meetings, it could reason over the transcript, i.e. the stuff that people have been saying. There was an update that then allowed it to reason over the chat content. So when you asked it, has anybody addressed a question? Has that question been answered? It could pull against the audio and the chat. One of the things they're adding now is that if you screen share content into a meeting, you can ask it questions about that content. And there are some guardrails around that about how long the thing has to be shared on screen before it's allowed to, understand the data in there. But I believe what's happening is there are little kind of picture slices being taken. Those are being stored, I understand, alongside the transcripts, which is in the same location as the meeting recording, but you can't see them. They're kind of hidden away by the Microsoft service. But it's worth knowing that that's kind of tied alongside there. Now, there is a policy setting that you can set in your SharePoint Online tenant that is specifically to block the ability to download recording files if you want to, right? So if you want to make sure that no matter what permissions people have got, you don't want them to be able to download an offline meeting recording, there is some stuff that you can put in by PowerShell. And you can also use this exclude block downloads group IDs, which is a fun one. If you get the enter group ID, the massive long GUID string, you can put them in there in a comma-separated list, and you can exclude, these groups of people are still allowed to download stuff, even if I blocked it at the tenant level. Maybe a use case that you have. Now, this is the other fun one here. Set CS Teams recording rollout policy. Identity is the name of the policy that we're creating, and this is the important bit, the meeting recording ownership. There's actually a policy that changes that behavior of the person who recorded the meeting. Clicked record is the person that owns the recording. You can actually set it so the organizer is always the person who hosts, who takes the recording. And I can see quite a few scenarios where actually that's quite a helpful thing. That might be something that you want to do. So it's there in PowerShell if you want to get into that. Now, you might say, Ben, what happens if the user doesn't have a OneDrive for Business license? How are we going to store that? We don't have anywhere to put the data. Don't worry, Microsoft's got you covered here, okay? So if you don't have a OneDrive license, it will go against the co-organizer if there is a co-organizer associated with the meeting. Anybody used the co-organizer stuff? Yeah, Satish, you're going to say yes to everything. So there's the ability to specify other people who are responsible for the meeting alongside the creator, right? The creator is by default the organizer. You can add in this role called a co-organizer who has controls over most of the functionality in the meeting. If you have more than one co-organizer, it goes by the hierarchy of the first letter of the Entra-GUID for that account to determine which co-organizer it selects to put that against. If not, it goes against the person who initiated the recording. And if nobody has a OneDrive for Business license, it goes into an async media storage location. Okay? You know what that is? No? All right. Well, an async storage location is kind of like that blobby chat storage thing that we talked about for Azure for the chat stuff, right? The meeting will live there for 21 days. If you don't go and download it and store it somewhere else, it gets binned off and it doesn't try and rewrite that to anywhere else. It doesn't look for another OneDrive location. I mean, to be fair, Microsoft, I think, did a pretty good job of trying to make sure it was storing that somewhere safe before it gives up and is like, screw it, I'm going to put it somewhere. Just take it if you want it. All of that stuff is on this URL. Again, this is what I mean. There's some quite long, gnarly URLs that you probably don't want to try and catch now, but you can get them. You can go and have a look at this stuff if it's the kind of thing that keeps you awake at night. Okay, next table. This one is about files and Teams phone related stuff. So one-on-one chat files. That goes against OneDrive for Business. So the person who shared it into the chat, it goes there. Teams will automatically permission it so the people in the chat have access to that file. Channel files. Go on, this is getting easy now, right? Goes against the group SharePoint. CDRs, call records, they go into the user's mailbox. There are other places that will be stored because you have things like CQD, you have stuff, just a CQD, Core Quality Dashboard. That's the 10,000 foot view of how calling and stuff is going in my organization. So you can look at trending around locations and all that kind of fun stuff. There's also Advanced Call Diagnostics, ACD. Is that right? What's the acronym? It's the other one where you go look at the user and say this user's having these problems. Their CDRs are also there, but they are kept against the user's mailbox. Voicemail. What happens with voicemail in Teams? User mailbox. User mailbox, if it is a standard voicemail. There are some scenarios if you're doing voice apps, that's the fun stuff around call queues and auto attendance, where you can divert stuff to a voicemail for the group. That would go into the group mailbox. If you need a shared mailbox, you can do it that, or a shared voicemail, I should say. Call recording. Does anybody know what I mean where I've split this into two? I've got informal call recording and I've got formal call recording. So sorry? Yeah, it's compliance recording, yeah. So informal recording is, I am on a call, I hit the record button, and it gets stored. That goes into my OneDrive for Business, similar to what happens with a meeting, right? If we're doing compliance call recording, that is where we have policy. We are mandating that a call needs to be recorded, usually, for contact center or, alongside a contact center or something like that. That is only surfaced through third-party solutions and products, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. Effectively, there is an Azure bot service. When a call that establishes that needs to be recorded, the bot joins that call, it sits there and it siphons out the audio and whatever other media from that call, and it goes and writes it to whatever its back end may be, and that will vary by whomever's call recording solution you're taking. That could be on-prem storage, that could be Azure Blob storage, that could be other storage solutions. So it's like it's going somewhere else. Okay, so that's kind of Teams. That's the main things. There is a whole gnarly world of edge cases and weirdy, wonderful things that you don't kind of think about, but hopefully you can see the theme that Microsoft's got there of those broad two locations of SharePoint and Exchange is kind of where it's going to put stuff. Loop and Copilot. How many people have used Loop? Alrighty. So I don't really need to do my gnarly explanation about what Loop is, or I do? Maybe, sort of. So I did a presentation a few weeks, half a month or so ago, and I did a similar trick where I had like 3 slides up, and then I asked Copilot to generate me the last slide live in my demo, which, you never quite know where Copilot's going to go. But I asked it to define what Loop was, And this is effectively those bullet points that it gave me. So Loop is a collaborative workspace tool. It allows teams to create and share dynamic content. Those components can be integrated in M365 apps. That enhances productivity to real-time co-authoring. Okay, so, it's a bunch of words. The good old days with documents. We used to have a file, we'd share it on our desktop, we'd need people to review it, we'd email it out to 5 different people, we'd get 5 different copies back, tagged if you're lucky with like V1, V2, _BL for my initials, _potential final, whatever it is. And you'd then have to go and collate through those and work out which version we're taking and what the edits were, because people didn't put track changes on and all that kind of stuff, right? Then that problem went away. Everybody learned how to do it properly because we had SharePoint. And we had SharePoint Online that had document libraries and versioning and real-time co-authoring. So you could send out, you'd never attach a file anymore, right? No, never. You send out the link to the file in SharePoint, and people can open that document, and you can see 3 people are reading this at the same time, right? It was everybody had a view back to that master document. That was like the source. Loop is a similar thing, but instead of looking at the document, it is looking at an individual lower-level component. Right? So Loop is comprised of components, pages, and workspaces. A Loop component is a little bit like a canvas, like a one-note canvas, but not quite. It can contain a table, it can contain a Kanban board, it can contain a bulleted list, it can contain a block of text, like an element of things. And those components you can take and you can insert them into other places in the M365 stack. Those other places could be inside a Teams channel message. It could be inside a chat. It could be inside a meeting invite. So a really nice use case for Loop is if I need to have a meeting about some project that I've got coming up, in the body of my invite, instead of writing my agenda of these are the 5 things that I want to talk about, anybody let me know if there's anything else you want to cover, you can insert a Loop component and you can write those 5 things that you want, and anybody else at any point in time when they open that invite will see those 5 bullet points and they can add more to it. Everybody, you can kind of imagine if this is the component, you've got like a window to it from over here, from over here, from over here, but you're always looking back to that source Loop component, right? So people can kind of freestyle edit it. Loop isn't perfect in 2 ways. Probably more than that, if I'm honest. But those 2 ways are external sharing can be a bit complicated. There is a way to do external sharing, but it's a little bit gnarly because of it's relatively new. It's a thing that they need to figure out. And it doesn't do synchronization, offline synchronization. Microsoft will tell you it does synchronization because all of those different components always stay in sync. To me, that's not quite synchronization because you're always actually just looking back to the original source file, similar to our original file in the SharePoint email analogy, right? So that's kind of, what Loop is. The use cases where you might want to use Loop, things like your personal notes. If you want to, the way it works is you can have these workbook things. So you can kind of collate, I make a personal projects workbook, and then if I've got loops with different projects and people in my organization, I can pull in those pages and kind of build my own little notebook, for want of a better word, which lets me see the status of those projects and those information in real time. Meeting agendas, like I said, is quite a nice one. You can throw them in as a meeting agenda. Be careful because of that external sharing. Doesn't really work so well if it's an external meeting because the person who receives that won't be able to view the Loop component. But if you're doing internal meetings, it's quite a nice use case to do it there. Channel chats. Another example is we had a company conference in Berlin the other week. The internal travel booking system sends you an email with this is your flight information, all that kind of jazz. My boss sent an email to everybody saying, can you please email me your copy of the flight records so that I can build up a table of who's coming in when, and I know what's going on. I talked to him and there were two things that I said to him. One was, you're spending like half an hour of your time going through and dragging all this stuff. First of all, we didn't have a nerds team. That hurt me as a Teams professional starting a new organization. It's like, you guys don't do Teams properly. I need to fix this. So we sorted out a team for our head nerds team. And in that channel that we'd made, I made a new message saying, this is everyone's flight information for the Berlin trip, and we put a loop component in. And we built a table in that loop component with the names of people, what time you're getting in, what's your flight number, blah, blah, blah. And then you just ping in the channel, like, at everybody, please can you fill in your line of this so that we know when's coming in. So we're outsourcing immediately. I'm not having to do it. You're just getting everyone to fill it in, and everybody can see everybody else's stuff when they're traveling, as long as they're online. If something happens, they're delayed, whatever, they can still update their lines in that table, right? That's quite a nice use case for it. The actual proper use case was we have Copilot for M365. So actually I said to him, ask Copilot. Go tell Copilot, because everybody had emailed him their flight details. I was like, Copilot, make me a list of all the people in my team and when they're arriving. And he did it. And it came back with 5 people, and it was in a bullet list. And he was like, well, that's not what I wanted. I was like, fine, tell it. What did you want? I was like, well, I wanted it in a table. Copilot, please make that into a table. Woomph. And he's like, but that's, because it's only got 5 people and there's 7 people in my team. I was like, right, well, tell it. Copilot, you're missing Ben and Paul. Can you add them in? Well, yeah, certainly. I missed them. Woomph. Adds them in. There we go. So now we had that table. We took that table, put it in the loop component, copied and pasted it in. And actually, you'll notice inside Copilot, when you interact with Copilot, you might see there's a button called Push to Pages or Save in Pages or something like that. When you do that, that's actually Loop that it's using behind the scenes, or not behind the scenes, but what it'll do is you go your chat that you're having, you hit that button and it opens a second panel up. That second panel is a Loop component, so you can then interact with the text of the output there and modify it, etc. So that was not the right thing to do, but we took that table, put it in the channel. It was like, instead of now everybody, can you take some time to fill it in? It was like, everybody, here's your details, check they're correct, job done. Nobody used it. That's because they're not used to using Teams properly, but I'm trying. I'm getting there. It is a hill that I will die on. Okay, so where does Loop store its stuff? There are a couple of rules of thumb. If it's this phrase here, it generally goes into the user's OneDrive, right? So if I do something in Loop, that .loop file will usually go against my OneDrive for Business storage, where collaborative storage isn't available. I like that phrasing, it's quite nice. What it means by collaborative storage is if we're not doing it in a group setting. So that thing of when we did that flight roster and we put it in a channel, that was in a channel. There is a group storage available because there is the team M365 group with its SharePoint. That's where that file would have gone in that scenario. If you are creating stuff inside Loop, there is this notion that Loop has around workspaces, which uses SharePoint embedded. I've got a page that we'll talk about on SharePoint embedded. There's an official table that Microsoft has. This is not, we're not going to play a game with this one. This is just nicked shamelessly off the TechNet pages with sources down the bottom here. But this is showing you where those different kind of elements live. So in the Loop app, content is in the SharePoint embedded. If it's in a Teams channel meeting, it's in the meetings folder, blah, 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 blah. If it's a private meeting, it goes into the user's OneDrive in the meetings folder, etc. So Microsoft, again, is following the sort of precedent that it's set, that this is the way that they're kind of doing stuff. So, Ben, what's SharePoint embedded? I hear you potentially not asking because it's warm in here and you're dozing off. Fortunately, we have a slide for this. SharePoint embedded is the file engine that Microsoft is using for these kinds of workloads, these kinds of scenarios where it's building these kind of modern application things that integrate across the rest of Office 365. SharePoint embedded is something that you can use as a developer if you are developing some form of platform or solution or service. You can only access it through APIs, so you won't see it anywhere in the SharePoint Online Admin Center or anything like that. You can only interact with it through another application. The reason that it does this is all of the stuff that we'll talk about later in the kind of purview compliance tooling stuff, it can take advantage of that. So things like eDiscovery or labeling or what have you, because the containers are ultimately living in a SharePoint storage space, and we know Microsoft knows how to interact and deal with stuff in a SharePoint storage space. We get all that good stuff. All of the M365 controlling, sharing controls of access and limiting access and rights and permissions, we get all of that fun stuff. And we can have Copilot reason through it. Copilot can see that and can interact with it depending on what it is. It's only accessible through the app, whatever you have built with the API access. And it doesn't count towards the SharePoint tenant overall storage limit, but Loop does. So Loop is using these underneath, but Loop is including the billing for that, like in the license for using Loop, and Loop is included in the M365 license. If you feel the desire to go and dev your own thing, the billing is based on storage. API is the amount of data egress, the amount of data that you're downloading out of that SharePoint embedded storage. Again, more of a bonus slide, but it was worth seeing as I talked about SharePoint embedded, just at least roughly explaining what that is. So I said Loop is kind of weak on a sharing with external people. Again, this is maybe a little bit more of a bonus slide, but internal sharing of Loop stuff is really easy. Microsoft will normally, when you share something into when you create a loop in a shared location, it will permission it to the users that have access to whatever that shared location is, right? If I'm doing it in a meeting invite and we send it, it'll permission it to the people who are on the meeting invite. External sharing is a little bit tricky. You need to use guest file sharing for that. So it's like you can't have an actual external entity. You know, the notion of being a guest inside a tenant, where you have to kind of sign into that tenant to be in the guest account persona. So you've validated, you've authenticated yourself from your home tenant, but you're now in whatever the source tenant is. You need to have this business-to-business invitation manager thing enabled. You can restrict sharing using sensitivity labels, conditional access, which can kind of block some of this stuff. And you have to be signed in as that guest account to get it. This is something that over time they're going to have to make easier. They're going to have to figure out a slightly different way of gluing these components together. I mean, Loop itself is 18 months, 2 years old. Who was here for the keynote last year? That was like the team from Loop were kind of making their big strides forward in their keynote announcement. Like it's accelerating quite quickly. And Loop is going to be, I believe, become more and more key to kind of Copilot's usage experience. That's why I kind of wanted to make sure we touched on it and touched on where the data lives. Speaking of Copilot. Again, we don't have a table for this, but when we are interacting, we are talking with Copilot. Generally speaking, those are going to be popped in a hidden folder somewhere inside the user's mailbox, right? If we are doing that push into Pages, that is going to go into my Loop workspace, which is one of those SharePoint embedded sites that's kind of personal to me. But there's a couple of things that are going to come along in Copilot that we're not necessarily sure how that's going to work, right? There's this notion of a facilitator agent. Have people seen what the facilitator agent is? That's where you can have it in a meeting and it like keeps you to track, etc. Incidentally, if you've watched any of the demo videos or used it, that pane you get down the right-hand side, that's a Loop component of like this bullet list of these are the agenda items, this is what's happening, blah, that's a Loop component. But where's that going to be stored? Is that going to be stored me as the meeting organizer? Is that going to be in my Loop? If it's a channel, it'll probably go against the channel. We don't quite know where that's going to live at the moment. There's also this notion of a team Copilot. Microsoft announced, but then we haven't seen a huge amount for it. A team Copilot is a Copilot agent that can live as a party in your channel, and you can ask it questions about what's been going on in the channel, et cetera, et cetera. Where's that going to store its interactions? I'm assuming that must write it into the group mailbox, and maybe it's going to do that thing where it's going to put a copy in everybody's mailbox, similar to the Teams one-on-one chats where there are multiple copies. Again, because when we get into needing to do eDiscovery purview fun stuff, that's going to be surfaceable when you search me for something. That's going to be an interaction that I've had, even though it was not a one-on-one interaction. We'll see what that looks like. Alrighty, next section. Where in the world? Where in the world does all this stuff get stored? It's all very well that it's in Exchange. Where's my Exchange live? Where's my SharePoint live? If you have a standard tenant, you can go and have a look under M365 admin portal in settings, organizational profile, data locations, and you will see this. This shows you the kind of core workloads as Microsoft have them defined and where they are. So my tenant was created as it wasn't a UK tenant because there wasn't such a thing as a UK tenant at the time. My tenant is in the EU. I think I'm in Amsterdam North or something like that, or Europe North, which is Amsterdam. The location is set at the time the tenant was created. there are some circumstances where you can ask to migrate that. So for example, when the United Kingdom severed themselves from Europe and we sailed off on our lonesome, and there was a UK tenancy option added, you could request to have your stuff queued up and migrated over to the UK tenant if you wanted to. The list of countries where you can have your tenant is quite vast, actually. There's quite a lot of options now. I've just noticed, actually, that North America on there. For some reason, we don't have North America on there. You definitely can have a North American tenant, right? That is pretty much the default one. But there's, we've got India, we've got Germany, we've got Qatar. Some of these are only available for new tenants. You can't necessarily migrate your data to these locations. But again, there are some scenarios where you can. This is the link down the bottom here that gives you the location of where these things can be kept. There is a thing Microsoft has called ADR, Advanced Data Residency. This is an add-on license that you can buy for your tenant, which gives you tighter controls, better guidance, better restrictions on where Microsoft is holding and processing your data. As a license, it's about in the region of £16-17. I couldn't find out what that was in dollars. But it has to match the number of licenses in your tenant, right? So that means if you have 2,000 E3 licenses and you've only allocated, for some reason, 1,500 of those, to use ADR, you have to have 2,000 ADR licenses. You can't have only the 1,500 that you're using. You have to license everybody in the environment. This is the text that you get when you purchase ADR. This is the commitment. Microsoft makes commitments to store certain customer data at rest in the applicable local region geography for eligible customers that have purchased ADR. Right? If you're an organization that really cares about where your data is and where it's being processed, effectively what it means is they're not going to kind of send stuff cross-regional boundaries. They are going to, the key there is at rest. It's going to live always in the region that you specify that it needs to live. So, if you're a company up in Canada, you need to make sure your stuff stays in Canada. You don't want it in the US these days for some reason. Then maybe something like ADR is an answer to that, right? You can choose to migrate the data when you first apply and have ADR added into your tenant. So that screenshot that I showed you before that showed me where my locations are, if I had ADR, if data was stored a little bit higgledy-piggledy all over the place, there would be a tick box that I could tick, hit save, and it will queue up my data that's not in my region to kind of consolidate and corral it into one place. Because this is a Teams conference and we were talking about Teams, this is the information that they say about Teams, Microsoft Teams chat messages, including private messages, blah, 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 for customers using blah, 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 blah stream. That's the data that is going to be covered by the ADR. That's what it is going to make sure. Those little microservices and stuff. It's basically meaning, obviously, the mailbox for the user is in the right location, but also those microservices where we're passing and using it are going to be maintained in region. For SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, the workload data is expected. The files are going to be in the location, the region that you've specified, and the mailbox is going to be in the location containing the calendar, the contacts, the hidden folders, all that kind of fun stuff. And for Copilot, again, there was a weird phrasing that Microsoft had. I've chopped the phrasing slightly, but it's any stored content of interactions with M365 Copilot. But they're already going into the user's mailbox, so I'm not entirely sure what they mean when they state that. But again, it's giving you, in theory, reassurance that is something that is there. If you want to learn more about it, there is the Advanced Data Residency page where you can learn about it. Okay, so that's ADR. There is a second thing that can deal with geography. This used to be called like MNC support, multinational something. It is now called multi-geo. This is the ability to split your workload up for your tenant by user, right? So if you have some users in Europe, some users in North America, you can split that out and say the European stuff stays in Europe, the North America stuff stays in North America. Because remember, the default is that it is in the location where my tenant was first created. So everybody, regardless of service usage is this user is consuming stuff out of the UK. Talked about that in my location session. That is, that user can have UK phone numbers, blah, blah, blah. That's the service, the usage location. This is the ability to say my mailbox, my Teams data, my OneDrive is in the UK and other stuff for everybody else is elsewhere. It's only a thing that's available for enterprises. If you're on small business for any reason, it's not applicable. And you have to have a minimum of 5% of the organization needing to be in a different location to be eligible for it. You can't just have 1 or 2 users. It has to be 5% of your total licensing to be able to have multi-geo. Back on that previous, the ADR stuff, I said you have to have a license to cover all of the users or all of the licenses in your environment. If you have multi-geo, that counts as well, right? So you don't have to have ADR and multi-geo. You just have to have enough to cover everybody if you want to do both. The terminology when you're dealing with this is you have your central location, that is your home tenant location, and then we have satellite locations. When you apply for multi-geo and you change data for a user, nothing has to be configured specifically for Teams. Nothing has to be changed particularly for SharePoint. For Exchange. For SharePoint, you do have to consider URL changes because you know how you've got a base URL for your SharePoint location. There are some catches and some gotchas that's not worth going into here, but be aware that that is something you need to kind of untangle. How this works is against the user, you have this attribute called preferred data location, and you set the ISO country code as the preferred data location, and that will then mean that that user's data is migrated into that location. So what the implication of this is for Teams, new users that are created, this obeys the PDL attribute, that location. So if a new user comes along, we have multi-geo. If the user has a PDL set difference to the primary tenant location, the stuff to do with Teams is going to live in the new location. If we have existing users and we change the PDL, then there is a migration process that kicks off behind the scenes. So the users' chats, channel chats, images, even though remember they're in that as your weirdy thing, they will get pulled and they will get migrated to the other regional, as your weirdy thing. And the user's files, depending on what's happening with their OneDrive location. The migrations get queued. You can view them in PowerShell. There are some commandlets you can run to have a look at the status of what is going on. But what locations are used? If we have one-to-many chats and there's something specific that lives against the user, it goes against the chat creator, because we can have this conflict, right, where we've got one user's data supposed to be in one location and another user's data supposed to be in another location. The main use case there is when we create a team, right? So when we create a team, we create an M365 group. The M365 group will get this attribute, a PDL. We can change that if we want to, but the PDL is taken at the time of creation by the person who created the team, right? So if I make it, it inherits my PDL. If you change that, most of the content will migrate, So, the chats, the mailbox, all that sort of stuff, you need to manually migrate the SharePoint files. If you change it on a group mailbox, you have to manually trigger a thing to pull it out. Okay? Is that exciting stuff you didn't know existed in M365? Yeah, good stuff. Let's talk about Copilot and searching and graph. Many people seen this diagram before? Handful. This is a diagram that explains some of the architecture around Copilot for M365. The outer line here is the M365 service boundary, and the inner line here is the customer's M365 tenant. I touched it. I touched the stand. This is the boundary of my tenant. So any of the stuff we've been talking about, my SharePoint files, my mailbox, all of that stuff live inside here. We won't go through this diagram, but the key point is the reason organizations generally are interested in M365 Copilot versus GPTs and other stuff out on the internet is when you ask Copilot to do something, it is contained inside the M365 service boundary that you trust, that you've gone through the due diligence with, that security, InfoSec, whatever have approved. And the data still lives inside this thing that's accessed through Graph. What is Graph, I hear you not ask? Graph is the ability to access all of the things to do with me. It's kind of the underpinning substrate. So you can see here we've got chats, calendar, files, messages, meetings, people. This diagram over here is quite a nice little explainer that we have kind of the apps at the top. When we ask Copilot to do something, it goes through the graph, and that can be pulling out data from my OneDrive, emails from my mailbox, my chat, my SharePoint, etc. This is the key to what makes M365 Copilot M365 Copilot. It is filtering, sourcing, grounding the data through my information that I have access to. There are a few things that underpin how that actually works. One of them is this thing called the semantic index. A semantic index is a bunch of crawling that Microsoft has done across all of the data that's in your environment, and it builds up, not a word cloud, but it kind of does this association of words that are similar to each other. So, like food words would all kind of be close to each other on the semantic index versus, botanical words or financial words or whatever it may be. It's kind of, when you ask the LLM Copilot about something, it's kind of using the proximity of some of these words to try and help understand that context, et cetera, et cetera. The semantic index is something that happens or is built at the organizational level. There is also a user level index that is created if you're on the full M365 for Copilot license. This stuff is still protected by the graph permissions. That's something that I kind of forgot to mention here, is that when we ask Copilot a question, it will only ever provide the answer filtered through what my user account has permissions to access, right? So it won't go and find data from everywhere in my environment. It's filtered to stuff that I have access to. That is still a problem because SharePoint by default, when you create stuff, used to be everybody in my organization is the default permission. So HR create an HR team, and it might be set to everybody in my organization has permissions there, unless somebody has gone and changed it. There are a couple of things that we can do. I think I have a full slide that kind of talks about that. But essentially, you can pull stuff out of the semantic index, or you can do like a SharePoint restricted site search. The SharePoint search has to be operational for Copilot to be able to pull data out of it, and there's that selective removal. Bonus slide. When you ask Copilot to do something against the internet, some people are concerned about, well, what actually is the data that has to go outside my tenant boundary, right? That has to be a query going outside. This example I'll squiz through, but when the user asks Copilot a question like, we're considering a possible acquisition, can you tell me about financials for that company? That is actually the text that goes out to the Bing search API. Fabricum strategy, Fabricum financials, and that is the data that Copilot then passes to give me the response. So as we get more and more of these Copilot plugins, agents that are using other external data sources, it's worth understanding that the whole query that the user typed in as a question to Copilot isn't being sent out. Copilot's kind of parsing it to work out what query it's going to make and then get the data back. So, how do you solve that problem of having different permissions against parts of your SharePoint? I've split this into two. You've got a short term and a medium term. Short term, you can do a thing called the restricted SharePoint search. You can ring fence certain sites in SharePoint and say, these are good. You're allowed to answer when a user asks a question from graph against these locations. And then you expand that as you get, I think you can have up to 25 sites. When you get to that point, hopefully you've tidied up the rest of your environment, and then you can remove those guardrails. You can do the semantic index removal, so you can explicitly remove sites out of the semantic index. You actually also now get the SharePoint Advanced Management license when you buy a Copilot license. It used to be a different add-on, but you can do reviews of site permissions. You can do audits of give me lists of sites that haven't been used for a long time. You can kind of do a whole bunch of cleaning house with your SharePoint. And really, you want to be doing a data discovery project, like going and actually looking through your environment. In the long term, you can use sensitivity labeling from DLP policies. You want to be doing governance reviews where you're regularly reviewing content and what's in your environment, and you want to be doing lifecycle management stuff. But this is something that's kind of complicated. So these are the kind of quick, short-term things if you are concerned about that permissions problem. Okay? We're nearly there. We're nearly home. I told you it was going to be short. The last bit I wanted to talk about was the audit logs and purview. So we've talked a whole bunch about kind of where data's living and what have you, and I said we were going to ramble around a little bit because this isn't directly related to that data, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that Microsoft has inside M365 that is worth knowing that's kind of along these lines. First one is the audit log. The audit log comes in two versions. There's a standard version or a premium version. The difference is, I think on standard, it's 180-day retention of the auditable items. If you have the premium version, it is a 1-year log retention. And if you need more than that, there's an add-on license that you can buy that gives you a 10-year retention on the audit items. If you need that. Some regulated industries, that's what they need, right? What the audit log contains is a log of the application administration activities. So when an admin does something in Enter ID, it keeps a record of that. When a new group's added or when a permission's changed or a policy is changed, that sort of stuff goes up against there. When policies are updated, tags are applied to messages, etc. Interactions inside Copilot, so adding, disabling plugins, prompt books. If people are doing more and more stuff with agents in Copilot, those activities will be logged against the audit log. Any of the stuff in eDiscovery, which we're going to talk about briefly on a purview slide, when people are doing eDiscovery cases or they're running queries to find information across your environment, those things are put in the audit log. And then here, access like modifying, downloading, deleting SharePoint files, etc. Again, there's a more detailed list available kind of down the bottom here. So the last thing that we are going to talk about is the Purview suite. Has anybody played with Purview? You've heard the term a little bit. Defining what Purview is a challenge. There's a bunch of different Microsoft sites that have kind of references to some of them. I've got the link down the bottom there that has the overview. What I've done, again, we're not going into depth with this, but I just want to give you a flavor of the different kinds of components that you can use. But the Purview suite is a little bit like the Defender suite is the security and the protections for your devices, your endpoints, your antivirus, whatever. Purview is your way of protecting the actual information inside your organization. So the compliance, the governance, all those kinds of things. In fact, it is a suite of data management and protection tools. Couldn't have said it better myself. First one of these is this thing called eDiscovery. It comes in a basic license or a premium license, which is an E5 thing. It allows you to search through and export content. So that is, we've had a legal issue. We need to find everything to do with Ben and what happened with the Comms v Next conference. We can go and run a case and we can search through my mailbox to find all the times I swore at Josh and told Jonathan I wasn't going to wear a beaver costume for my presentation and all that kind of stuff. That's what an eDiscovery thing is for. You can build up cases and you can go look through them. And there's ways, there are different roles in all of these things. So you can have reviewers, you can have auditors, you can have everybody kind of nicely bundled up. We have a thing called DLP, data loss prevention. That is an E3 and an E5. That is dealing with restricting external sharing. So stopping an email going out when it has sensitive data in it, stopping a user from sharing a file that has sensitive content in it. We have data security posture management. Okay, that is an E5 thing. That is to do with looking through the data that we have in our organization and giving you an overview of how at risk you are or where you might have vulnerabilities, that kind of stuff. Like you might have oversharing in this location or someone over there is trying to do something that they're not meant to do. We have information barriers. Information barriers is preventing internal sharing from happening between particular departments or particular groups. SharePoint talked about how you can do easy sharing with other people in your organization. It might be that you have people working for competing customers. You need to make sure that they're not talking to each other. An information barrier can stop data being shared, and that data can include Teams chats, it can be meetings, it can be files inside SharePoint where we don't want them to go across. We have information protection. That is, there's an E3 version and an E5 version. That is being able to kind of look through the data that we've got inside the documents. There's stuff like sensitivity labeling, assigning it to a category, determining what happens from a DLP point of view. We have inside a risk looking, this is an M365 E5. It's not an O365 E5 capability. So it's like top of the tree license. Looking at what user behavior is, kind of ties in a little bit with the security posture management. Is someone doing something that they shouldn't be? Again, making sure you're in a good place. We have a thing called privileged access management. Does anybody use PIM? Privileged identity management. So PIM is the ability to elevate your admin roles to, I want to be a Teams admin for 4 hours. Privileged access management complements that, is different to that. Instead of being PIM, which is role-based against the kind of standard admin roles, it is action-based. So you can have the ability to restrict creating a mailbox. I need to be able to create a mailbox for the next few hours, as opposed to I need to be an Exchange admin for the next few hours. So it's a different way of kind of dealing with least privilege or least permission in your environment. Nearly there. And we have data lifecycle management. Data lifecycle management is an E5. That is to do with mandatory deletion or retention periods where we need to make sure the data is cleansed, removed. So again, all that fun stuff where we're talking about chats going into a hidden mailbox for auditing purposes. The reason that happens is so that we can pass through them on an eDiscovery, so that we can apply data lifecycle management and make sure we're deleting chat messages over 90 days if that's what we want to do at an organizational level. Now, I appreciate that these things are quite complicated to figure out. So if I duplicate my screen, I just wanted to show you this web page. This is m365maps.com. A few nodding heads in the room. This is an amazing website for figuring out what is included in what thing. So by default, when you go to it, you can pick one of the license types. And you get this nice little diagram with little blobs for the individual kind of SKUs contained, and it will draw into the bundles. So you can see here, this is the Entra ID plan, which is part of the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. We call the Intune Plan 1. Okay, so if you're not sure what's included in what bundle, this is a nice place to come. The thing you should look at is we've got a feature matrix down the bottom there. And the feature matrix, we can then search for a specific thing. So if I do DLP, or in fact, data loss prevention there, we then just can see easily Office 365, E3, E5, frontline worker, there's the M365 plans. You can filter to only show the plans that you're interested in. Hi. This is m365maps.com. It's worth knowing. Sorry? Yeah, it's off the top of the projector. I've got it on one of my final closing slides. And again, decks will be available afterwards. But like, you've no idea when I was making this presentation how incredibly helpful all of those blooming purview sites and licenses and functionality, like, which one's that in again? And you can go and check. Alrighty. We are nearly there. Let's bring this home. I've got 4 minutes. Come on. Woohoo. Right, so the Purview suite. No, I'm kidding. Okay, told you, we're pretty much there. Summary. I told you this was a little bit rambly. I told you there was a little bit of maybe TMI in places. I wanted to just help paint the picture, that lifting the lid, right, of just having a look at what's kind of happening underneath, behind the scenes, with stuff that's going on. So the recap is all our data is stored inside Exchange and SharePoint. No, but for real. The data locations, usually stuff is in the mailbox in SharePoint and in OneDrive Online, and some of these auxiliary other services dealing with specific workloads. The reason it's there is for the search capabilities, the audit capabilities, and those purview protection capabilities. You remember I was talking about why SharePoint workspaces kind of make sense. Like, hopefully you can see that there's this rich set of tooling that helps deal with all of these things, that's why it's architected in this way. We talked a little bit about the residency and multi-geo. If you didn't know that was there, maybe it's something you don't need as an organization. But again, this is stuff that 3 years ago Microsoft didn't offer. They weren't there. They were just sort of there for big organizations. It's nice now that if you need that kind of thing, it's there. They're thinking about it. Those kinds of things are only going to get better, more powerful. You know, they're meeting customers where their requirements are. Yeah. We talked a little bit about Copilot search protections. There was that short-term, medium-term. Short-term, remember, was the restricted SharePoint site search, and there was the removal from the semantic index. Those are the two things that if you're worried about people coming through your Copilot infrastructure, that you should be having a look at. And then have a look at Purview if you need any of those advanced kind of tooling. Some of them are included in the standard license. And if you want to check, you have that m365maps.com to go and have a look at that. Okay? So, genuinely, we're at the end, and are there any questions that I can't answer? Hi.
For Copilot, what depth of information is there? Obviously, depending on the question, Copilot can be reasonable, a whole bunch of stuff. Is there reference to the files that Copilot looked? Is the web search, is that search information present in that user folder? Or do you
I don't have a complete answer. I don't know what they actually store, but I do know that if you have some of those purview licenses, I couldn't tell you which one it is, but there is a specific AI kind of compliance portal you can go and look at, and that will show you the questions the user has made, the answers Copilot has given, and it will show you the sources that were used. I don't know if it will tell you all of the data that it looked through, but it will tell you the references where there are references included in the answers, right? But if it looked through 10 documents and gave you references from 2, I think it's only the 2 that it would have in that audit log. But I believe that's more of a purview licensing thing.
When users create the pages, I noticed it's creating SharePoint admin center. Is that SharePoint edit?
Oh, do you actually see them?
Yeah,
I've not found them.
There's a separate containers drop down. It's kind of hidden.
Yeah.
I stumble across it and it lists out the name of the workspace and the user that generated it, but that's kind of all I can see.
Where is that?
So SharePoint admin center. At least this was back when Loop was rolled out. I probably last looked at it 10 months ago.
Somebody mentioned that in another session.
Because I, in theory, know the name of the stuff that I have in there. Then where?
Containers.
Yep. Ideas. That's my Loop workspace. Boosh. Okay, thank you. So you can find them. Yeah, that's a SharePoint embedded.
Okay.
And you can see there the application that is the Loop application that's made them.
And you can see the storage on that. It gives you some stuff.
Yeah.
All of it. So
Okay, that's good to know.
there's a weird adjacent place that it's dumping it separate.
Yeah. No, that's handy because it kind of comes back to that, it's part of your storage. So you kind of want to be able to figure it. The interesting thing as well with the SharePoint embedded is the maximum capacity is 25 terabytes. But I was reading through the Microsoft Docs and they're like, yeah, well, the capacity is 25 terabytes, but that exceeds anything any user's ever going to have. So you're never going to have a problem with it. And it's like, oh, all right, fair play.
For now, yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. Cool. All right. Well, on that note, I'm slightly over. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being at CommsV Next. Maybe see you another time.